Remember, guys, if you don't like this joke, laugh anyway. It's a pro-wife joke.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ken. How you doing?
Hey, something's going on over here that I don't want to be going on. I got too many computers and too many screens running. Sorry about that. Good to see everyone that made it this week. This week we're going to be talking about Gideon and a little bit of news. There's plenty of it going on. None of it seems too wonderful or too promising at this point, but we're going to cover it nonetheless. So if you want to take us out, Dr. Ricks.
Okay. There's a joke that at least some wives like. A husband went to the sheriff's department to report his wife was missing. And the sheriff asked him, well, when did she get missing? Well, she went shopping yesterday and hasn't been seen since. The sergeant says, well, what is her height? Husband says, well, I'm not sure. Maybe she's 5 feet, I think. What is her weight? He says, well, I'm not sure her weight, but she's not slim, but she's not overly fat either. He says, well, what color eyes does she have? He says, well, I never really looked at her eyes. I'm not sure. Maybe they're kind of brownish gray. What color hair does he have? The sergeant asked. The man says, her hair color changes about 2 or 3 times a year. I'm not sure. Maybe it's kind of brownish. Well, tell me what she was wearing. He says, well, I didn't notice. Maybe a skirt, maybe short pants, maybe long pants. I don't remember exactly. Well, the sergeant said, what kind of car was she driving? He says, oh, she was driving my pickup truck. What kind of truck was it? The sergeant said. He said, well, it was my brand new 2015 Ford F-250 King Ranch 4x4 with EcoBoost 6.7 liter engine, special ordered manual transmission. It has custom matching white covers for the bed, custom leather seats with Bubba floor mats, trailer package with a gold hitch, DVD with navigation, satellite radio, 6 cup holders, 4 power outlets, added special alloy wheels, off-road Michelin tires. Oh, one more thing. My wife put a little scratch on the driver's side door. At this point, the husband teared up a little bit, choked up. The sergeant said, don't worry, buddy. If she's in that truck, we'll find her.
That is absolutely correct.
My wife's looking kind of shocked.
Probably could tell you how many pounds of pressure were in the tires, too, in each one.
Hey, all that stuff he's got in there, what can you say? You got a missing truck like that. Well, speaking of the news, I thought maybe we ought to start off by talking about Greece. And something I didn't fully know. Greece not only is socialistic, it's a lot more socialistic than most of us know. A large percentage of the companies that normally would be private companies are owned and run by the government. By the way, you all know that if the government runs a company, they do not run as efficiently or profitably. That's just, what can I tell you? History proves that without a question of a doubt. So already, and about 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 3, I forgot which one is, workers all work for the government. And then you have companies that are run by the government. Do you see a problem here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they
Well,
tax. Go ahead, Dave.
what bothers me is I'm seeing more of that behavior in this country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you think about the cash for clunkers, people were turning in those vehicles, and those vehicles didn't end up in junkyards where you could go and pull, you know, whatever off of it and use it on your vehicle. Those vehicles were destroyed. So the ability to go to the local junkyard and locate an alternator or something for your vehicle went away. You now had to buy it from somebody who sold the vehicle or sold the parts, which were then manufactured by, you know, GM or whoever. So a lot of guys like my oldest son, he lives at those, you know, you pull it places, you know, and buying those things and putting them on his vehicles and all of that. Well, a lot of that stuff just didn't end up in the hands of the public where we could get it cheaply.
By the way, you know, they say the problem with a lot of government programs is unintended consequences. You know, cash for clunkers is supposed to make cleaner air and help the poor. Actually, several of our former graduates own used car businesses, and I just happened to, when one of them told me this, I asked the others. They all concurred. Cash for clunkers raised the price of recent used cars several $1,000s, because what happened was a lot of people don't buy new cars. You know, if you buy a car that's only 3 years old, 3 years old, you get a very good car, but a much lower price than new. And you know, a lot of people, that's a smart way to buy. Well, though a good chunk of those cars are now being chewed up for the government handouts, the less of those cars that were around, those that were around, and even the ones that were older, were worth more. So it's the, I mean this respectfully, the poor people who have to buy used cars had to pay more money.
A lot of people don't realize, and I don't know what it is today, but a while back I had listened to something. A car loses 70% of its value after the 4th year. So you buy a car 2-3 years old, the guy sitting next to you at the stoplight in the same car is paying a lot more for his.
That's why I buy cars 2, 3, 4 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a smart shopper.
Right.
Smart shopper does that. And it made it harder on those people, the people they were theoretically supposed to be helping. And I just know that many of these socialist programs in Greece have only made it harder for Greece and the poor people in Greece.
Yeah, it's like Mila Kunis. They asked her something one time, and she said, it always looks better on paper. She said, I came from a communist country. Communism looks great on paper, but trying to live in it, it doesn't work.
It's like stealing. I mean, income redistribution is like, it's really breaking God's law of stealing. And
Yeah, it is.
by
I mean,
the way,
sorry, go ahead.
they tried outrageously high taxes on the rich in Greece. What do you think happened to all those rich people that they were taxing to death in Greece?
They moved.
They left town.
Right.
And there goes their money and their jobs with them.
Yep. Their source of revenue goes out the door. And then that just makes it harder to get the revenue to pay back all the stuff they took from, you know, that they took from the back of other people.
You know, I like rich
Well,
people.
was it Margaret Thatcher said it best? Socialism works great till you run out of other people's money.
Yeah.
I like rich people. They buy stuff from me.
Oh, yes.
Saw a thing the other day, and a little boy says, Dad, I want to grow up and be an organized crime. He says, you want to work for the government or in the social or the civil job?
Organized crime, yeah.
You know what? That's funny. The state did take over, though. They took over everything the organized crime took over. They took over the gambling. You got your lottery, your state lottery. They took over the alcohol. So you got the state regulates, and I think Pennsylvania is the last one, but In a lot of states, they owned. I mean, they ran all the alcohol through the state stores. The state took over all the stuff that the mafia did.
Yeah, in Virginia, 30 years ago, 20-something years ago when I lived there, you buy your hard liquor from the state. You could buy beer and wine at your grocery stores or whatever, but if you're going to buy hard liquor, it's directly from the state store.
Didn't you remember they said that if we just had gambling in the state, it would solve all the education funding problems in America? Anybody remember that?
I do.
Oh yeah, they did the same thing here, and they begged for more. They said it would fix it in our state. We've got 2 casinos in the state, and maybe no 3. There's 3 right now. So they've got 3 casinos. All this stuff didn't pop up around the casino to make money. At least not the one around here. And they still put levies on every year to get money for the school. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, our casino here is owned by the Seminole tribe, and they have their own police, their own rules, and everything at the casino. So it's completely owned by the Seminole Indian.
By the way, they claim that they were never defeated in battle, the Seminoles. They just decided to cooperate. I just thought that was just a little aside. I mean, positive thing from their point of view. It doesn't really matter. One thing, if you look at Greece, the deadlines have passed. The Greek voters basically said, we want to live on other people's money.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want to be financially responsible. Take care of us, Europe. Now, the question is, I think we mentioned this last week, but it's worth mentioning again. If Europe, and that's what they think will happen, because the stock market kind of settled down, if Europe gives Greece a sweetheart deal where they, in reality, they'll never pay all their debt back, maybe just some of it. The problem with that is Greece is not that big, and maybe the northern European countries can afford to do it. But then what happens next year when Spain's debt comes up? Much bigger economy. And they say, well, Greece got a deal. Greece got a deal. You see the problem?
What's to stop everybody from doing that?
And then Italy, pretty big economy, may come along and say, we want a deal.
Portugal? Is it? They're all 4 of those. They're all kind of in there.
All I can say is, long term, unless Greece comes around and really pays their bill, long term, the European Union is doomed for financial crisis. They're kicking the can down the road, but to me, that's what one advisor heard on the radio, financial advisor, that's what he said, and I agree. We could be wrong, but you see any way they can get out of this unless Greece pays their debt?
You mean Germany?
I mean the rest of the European Union financially.
Right.
The central bankers.
There's no way. No, they've reached, their debt is 180% of their GDP. You can't pay that back. They spend 180% of their GDP, and there's a, what is it? There was a big article about all the cheating that they did, tax cheating. There's an island over there that it was 2.4% of the people on that island claimed to be blind. Well, the rate of, I mean, it was, hundreds of times the actual rate of people being blind, because if you're blind, you get more money. There was a swimming pool, huge tax on swimming pools, and so they were supposed to be, I forget what city it was, but in this city there was only supposed to be like 10 swimming pools in the whole city because of the tax rate on them. Well, Google Maps came out. They started looking at Google Maps. There wasn't tens of swimming pools. There wasn't hundreds of swimming pools. There were thousands of swimming pools that nobody was paying taxes on because the taxes were just ridiculous. There's just tons of tax cheating on taxes because they couldn't pay the taxes even if they wanted to. The taxes were so high. They somebody over there, some tax minister, finance minister said, I forget how he phrased it, but they thought there was a way if they got these chiefs to pay their taxes, they would have an extra, was it $5 billion a year, and they'd be solvent. Well, that's wrong, because even if they got that money, they just spend another $5 billion. They'd be 200% of their GDP right now. No matter how much money you give government, it needs more, because the people that run the government use that money to get votes to stay in office, period. They use it to buy their way. They don't care about the people. They only want to stay in office.
You know what bothers me? Probably, I see politicians pandering for votes, like sanctuary cities. I understand the strategy of pandering for votes. I see it might work. But they should be thinking about what's best for America first, pandering for votes second. I know those Greek politicians pandered. They probably don't know that much either. Just because they got elected to office doesn't mean they really understand economics. But I still also believe they pandered to votes regardless whether it was good for Greece or not. We'll worry about the future later. And the voters basically said the same thing. We'll worry about the future later. Give me my goodies now, and I'll vote for you.
Yep, and you know what? And the heck with my children, because they're the ones and my grandchildren. I don't care about them, because if they did, they wouldn't be doing this. They don't care about them because their backs this stuff's going to be on. They're going to be starving when their grandparents took the money and ran.
By the way, this also backs up one prophecy. Daniel and the 10 toes said the end time Holy Roman Empire would be iron and clay. And if you look at Europe, maybe we could debate about one country in the middle there, but for the most part of Europe, militarily and financially, is clay, and part of Europe, at least financially and assumed militarily, is iron. And they don't really mix. I mean, they're one nation, but they don't really fit. That's why it won't hold together for that many years, but just long enough to fulfill Bible prophecy. And you can see it in the finances. A lot of those countries, they call them the pigs, apparently they lied and cheated on their finances, records, to get into the EU, and they've been overspending and, what can I say, buying votes and with money they don't have. Hey, are we doing that in America?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Somebody said yes. The answer is yes. We're buying votes with money we don't have. Oh, speaking of buying votes with money we don't have, China, at least this is what I heard on the radio. I'm assuming this is accurate. They've had 2 stock market crashes, lost 30% of the value. And, that's a big economy. That's billions and billions of dollars. Well, their communist government, they promised, not to mess with the free enterprise capitalist market. Apparently, this was a little too much for them. They put in jail some of the people who made money selling short. And they've forbidden Chinese companies from selling, I think it's 20, from what I heard, 20 of their top stocks that were falling in prices. They're forbidden to sell them to try to prevent their price from declining. Now, I'm going to make a prediction. The Chinese government is trying through force, because they can throw people in jail, through force and probably secret police spying on people. They're going to force their stock market to not decline in value. My prediction is it will not work.
No, it won't work. You're right. Government intervention in business never works. They try to run a business, they will run it right into the ground. It just cannot function that way. Governments cannot run businesses and should never try.
If I were an outside investor thinking of buying a Chinese stock, and I saw that the government would not allow any Chinese businessmen to sell it, what do you think I would do? That would scare me off. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yep. The more governments try to control economies, the more they have to control the economy to prop it up until one day it just falls out from under it. They just can't keep it up forever.
And of course, they were saying, and I heard this on, I think it was ABC News, or one of the main news guys, it might have been some guy on Fox Business. He said, what happens to Greece will not affect the American stock market and won't affect our government. And maybe even implied that what happened to the Chinese stock market will not affect us either. Does that seem to you a little overly optimistic?
Yeah. Everything's tied together now. The whole it's a global economy. Anything that happens anywhere else affects everything to one extent or another.
I think it's just a matter of when and how much. And I don't, all I'm saying is we need to have our faith in God, because I see the system is headed for some kind of bubble burst, collapse, whatever economic term you want to use for it.
Yeah, I got an email from my investment broker, and he said investments are not doing well right now due to the uncertainty in Greece. So you wouldn't think, that would bother me in America or whatever, but it's all tied together.
We've always said, and I remember hearing GTA say this current European collection is going to have some kind of financial and other problems collapse, and out of that financial crisis will come the dictators that will create the beast and the false prophet in the end time. And it may only be a few years away. Also, who was it? Somebody said, remember, Dave, you were saying somebody said that America was too strong to ever fall from power. Was that you, Dave?
Yeah, that was me. A friend of mine told me. He said that he's very skeptical about the Bible in the future. He knows that historically it's 100% accurate, but he said that America cannot fall. We're too big. We're too strong. We cannot be invaded. They can never have martial law. The economy will always, no matter what happens, our resilience is so strong that we can never fail. And that to me is like that kind of mentality is not paying. He doesn't pay attention. The guy I'm talking about. I mean, he's a good friend. He's a good man, but he just doesn't pay attention. So he's been to the worst of the worst places, and he's seen what absolute poverty is. He was in Somalia when the Black Hawk went down, and he just says that cannot possibly happen in America. No way, just no way. But as we turn our back on God, the stories of God for help, and a generation later they're falling right back into idolatry, and then they end up punished and living under the rule of pagans, and then they cry out for help, and God comes back and He fixes, and it's just a vicious cycle.
Yep, and that's basically, I mean, that's part of Gideon. I mean, that was pretty much this, right before him, not long before him, was the start of the up and down, up and down, up and down of Israel, and how they would come up and they would do good for a few years, and then they would fall back into paganism, and then they would come up and it was just an endless cycle, and it goes on to this day with all the tribes. I mean, this country was up on an upward hill, and now they're dropping off. We're dropping off again. We're going back into more and more paganism.
Well, when the White House comes out and approves homosexual marriage, that's a finger in the eye of God, and God will not be mocked, and He don't lose. And what we need to do is learn to be obedient. When you're little and your dad says don't get under the cabinet, you get under the cabinet. There's punishment for that. Well, we're big. We're adults, and we can't look back at our history in this nation and how we got to be here and how the blessings we had. Look at World War II. Look at the blessings we've got. Every bit of it is because the people who founded this country were decent, moral people. And go forward 200 and whatever it is, 30 whatever years, look where we are today. When they come out, we have vets come back missing limbs, and they're ignored. Some pro baseball player or basketball player or whatever he was comes out of the closet and he gets a call from the president. Bruce Jenner decides to be a he, she, or whatever you want to call him, and the newscasters are saying how brave he is. That's not bravery.
He's getting an award for that. Did you
That's
hear
not
that?
bravery. That's just perversion. No, I did not hear that.
They're giving him some courage award.
I think he's Time Man of the Year. I say that figuratively, times man of the year.
Yeah, so what did Adolf Hitler at one time?
Well, whatever. I'll be nice.
By the way, in the case of the judges, for about a 300-year period after Joshua, during that 300-year period, Israel was ruled by judges, and they had God was their king. You know, they had priests who did certain priestly, legal kinds of things, but they had no central government. They had limited government and maximum freedom. And when they had a crisis and needed a leader, a civil leader, besides the high priest, God would pick one, he'd become the judge. And the pattern they got into, it actually started after Joshua. When Joshua was there, and the leaders who ruled with Joshua, when they passed away, and a 40-year period would go by, roughly 40 years, a new generation would come up that would have forgotten the good leadership and forgotten God for the most part. They go into sin, they have a crisis, then they cry out to the God of Israel. He'd send them a judge and a hero. He would deliver them, and they'd have maybe 40 years of prosperity. And then when the leaders who ruled with that God passed away, 40 years later, they would again forget God for the most part. And the cycle would go over and over again. And Joshua was one of those. And in Joshua's case, they had fallen away from God, forgotten God. God sent a prophet to tell them that's why you're being punished. And then God sent an angel to tell Joshua that he was the man that was going to deliver Israel. And I think it's interesting. Joshua's first response was, "Who, me? You're kidding, aren't you?"
Yeah, you don't see any of those guys saying, "Well, obviously it's me." Most of them. Jonah, he jumped off a ship. They didn't want to deal with it. But you see, God chooses who He chooses, and and He chooses humble men.
Interesting thing. Most of the prophets, not all, but most of them, said things like, "I'm too young," Jeremiah, or Moses, "I can't speak well." By the way, when Moses was 40, he was ready to lead Israel. But when he's 80 and he actually is chosen, he says, "I don't want the job. I'm not good enough." It is interesting how many of the people were called, quite a few say, "You sure you want to pick me? I'm not worthy."
I find it interesting talking about Moses, and I'm going to be off the subject a little bit. Moses effectively was offered a kingdom. It looks like Paul was next in line to be high priest. Christ was went up into his 40 days of fasting. Satan showed up and said, "I'll give you the world, I'll give you everything you can see." And all of them chose to have nothing but to be with God and worship God. So different mentality of the people of the world. They say, "You're going to give me all of this? Okay, I'm doing it your way."
And interesting that most of the people called, including Gideon said, "Who, me? Now he probably was exaggerating a little bit. "I'm the runt of the family, and our family is one of the least in our tribe in Israel. Why pick me?" And he said, "Mighty man of valor." Actually, I think Joshua probably was a man of some courage and valor, but he didn't think of himself as a hero. And what I think is, if you see someone, because I've had several people approach me and tell me, "I'm a prophet from God, you better listen to me." Usually they have some kind of, be kind. They have some kind of problem.
Yeah, I've got one here that he comes in and tells me about the visions he sees, and he actually hears God talk with him, but then he goes into trances and speaks in tongues and that kind of thing. He also is trying to convince me that people in Israel they're not Hebrew people. They're not Jews.
And one thing to consider, if God chooses you, say, to be one of the two witnesses or some great prophet, most people, if you really know the Bible, you realize that is going to be a job that will come with it, a certain amount of suffering, attacks, and most reasonable people say, I want to serve you, God, but you sure you want me? Doesn't that seem like Gideon's response to me seems very realistic?
Yeah, well, it seems like it's similar to some of the others, the humble. Moses, it says, it was the most meek man in the Bible. To have come from where he was in position to apparently just a goat herder at 80 years old, and then God says, okay, now you're ready, and the people are ready. He walked away from everything.
He could have been, he was a high-ranking person in Pharaoh's kingdom. In minimum, he probably could have been number 2 or 3 in the Pharaoh's empire, and maybe higher. You never know. But that's what the Jews say. But I think being a reluctant hero. There's also something else about Gideon that I think is helpful to us. Gideon needed reassurances from God, several, not only just the fleece, but several others, including walking into the enemy camp to hear how fearful they were at night. Gideon needed a number of reassurances that God was with him and he was the one chosen. Now you might think, well, God's going to be highly offended. I've already picked you and I showed you something already. Where is your sense of faith? But God was patient with Gideon. So I think what we need to think about is, if we feel some doubt or fear, God can be patient with us too, because he was patient with Gideon.
I think the fact that I'm alive and sitting here, God's been patient with me. I don't know, as a father, if I'd have put up with a kid like me.
Well, same here. Yeah, that's true. God's put up with us, and that's a lot. I want to look at one scripture. Then we can describe Gideon's experience a little more. But one scripture, this is Mark 9:24. And I think this scripture, because Gideon basically kept asking God for reassurances that he could handle this gigantic task of going up against a vast, probably very rough, tough, battle-hardened Midianite army and their allies. Mark 9:24. Immediately, Christ said to him, verse 23, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief," or strengthen my faith. And Christ did that, and the boy was healed. And I was thinking, obviously the man had to have some level of faith, or he wouldn't have been there asking Christ to do the miracle. And he admitted he had some faith, but he still had some doubts too. And I think the first thing to do is, if you do have doubts, just tell God the truth. God, I believe you. I believe the Bible, but I'm not so sure, whatever you're not so sure of.
Faith is the most important thing we've got right now. Is we've got to have faith. That is an attachment directly to God. And I was told a story by somebody recently that they went to church, and I believe it was his granddaughter was ill, and he asked one of the deacons or ministers to, what they could do to anoint the child. And he says, "I will anoint you, and hopefully through your faith, the child will be healed." And the little girl was healed. So faith, if we don't have faith, we're blowing it right there. You've got to believe that God is going to stand by you. Look at the apostles that walked out. The doors just opened in the prisons and they walked out. You've got to have faith that God is with you. And I think,
by the way, I do think this is true. There's a certain normal fear that people have when they're in a frightening situation. And so you shouldn't beat yourself up too much over normal fears. Just ask God to help you with it and do what you're supposed to do. Sort of like a hero can't be a hero if there's nothing to be afraid of. He has to overcome the fear.
Yeah, my father asked me when I was real little, he said, are brave men, are they ever afraid? And I said, no, they're brave. He said, no, they're scared to death, but they still do what they're supposed to do. That's what makes them brave. They have the same fear that you have, but they act appropriately. They do what needs to be done, while being shot at or blown up or whatever the terrible thing is, because we're talking about war. And that stuck with me because he defined that for me. So now when people talk about somebody being brave, I understand that better. It's because you have to act the right way in perhaps the most dangerous, frightening situation there could be, and that's where you get bravery. Not changing your gender.
Yeah, that's not a good reason to get the ESPN whatever award he's getting.
Yeah. The problem we have in this country is it's the king's new clothes. Everybody can look at things and tell what's right and wrong, but they don't want to say the wrong thing, so they'll look at a transgendered person and say, how brave, instead of how sad, how perverted. These are words that people don't use anymore.
Yeah, the guy's mixed up and confused, and everybody loves him. We just want him to, well, anyway, kind of get his life together. In Judges 6:11 through 8:33, the thing that's interesting about Gideon, the first thing the angel speaking for God tells him to do is to chop down the idol of Baal and Ashtoreth, Astarte. There's like male and female goddess. They're set up together, I guess, in the town square. And he gets 10 of his workers, and he chops it down and uses the wood from the Asherah pole, lights it, and burns up, I guess, the statue of Baal. Interesting, the town people want to come out and lynch him because he did that, and his dad comes to his rescue. He says, hey, if Baal is really a god, like you say it is, he can defend himself. Baal can strike him down. Why should you do Baal's dirty work? And I was thinking about certain world religions that feel they have to defend their religious leader and their God. They should let God do his own defending. But and that got him the title, Let Baal Contend. And once he got that title, that fame spread through Israel, and their enemies heard about it, that the Israelites have a leader now. So they mobilized their army to put an end to this thing quickly. And Gideon sent out word, and several tribes sent him a lot of volunteers. And God did not allow him to have a reasonable sized army. God had to all the frightened people leave, got down to an army of 300 brave men to fight over 100,000 Midianites. So God would get the credit.
Right, and you know what? Again, maybe a little off the subject, but the founders of our country took on the greatest nation, what's the word I'm looking for, in the world, and men like General Washington would be 30, 40 feet from the enemy's line, directing our troops, and bullets did not hit him, but he'd find them in his coat and everything else. That's a sign that our country was put together here for a reason by God. The word I was looking for was empire, the greatest empire that the world had ever seen. And guys with no shoes in the snow defeated them. So God's will be done, and he will not be mocked.
That's true. And one thing is true. God won the battle for Israel. 300 guys routed that whole army. Obviously, God did it, but using them, it proved that God gets the credit. And I was talking about the guy that told you that America is too big and too powerful to ever fall from power. And I thought, if God turns his back on us, anything is possible.
And God has not turned his back on us. We've turned our back on God. God wants us. Second Chronicles 7:14, I think it is. He says, "For the nation will turn their face back to me. I will bless them again." He's sitting there going, "Come on, guys, you can do this. Just go back to church, pray, study, stop doing these evil things, and I will heal your nation. But there's not a whole lot of people saying much about it.
No, this nation's doubling down on its sin. I mean, it's just compounding right now. They're just
Well, and they say that scripture, they declare their sin as Sodom. That's exactly what they're doing.
You know, before we went on the air, you were saying, Ken, that it's almost as if all these things are out to undermine Christianity in America.
yeah. Well, I hear a lot of people say it's they're going after religion. If you look at all the progressive, so-called progressive, I call them regressive, socialist movements, anything that is, you look at who the people who began, what's the Planned Parenthood. You look at the people that started the eugenics movement and how they tried to define racism and use that to justify the things they did. If you look at people who, every movement that has gone, that you could call something on the left, every one of these movements has been started. If you look at the very beginning of them, the people who started them, these people they hated God. Specifically, they hated Christianity. What was the book where they dedicated their book to Satan? The original rebellion, rebel.
Rules for Radicals, right?
Rules for Radicals. All right, that was dedicated to Satan. They teach this stuff. That's their playbook in all the colleges nowadays. Most of them. Every single one. It's not anti-religion. They're not going. You don't see them going to a Muslims and asking. You're not going to see them in mosques trying to get married. You're not going to see the gay movement push against the Buddhists, the Muslims, the any other religion on the planet. They will not go near them. They don't care. The only people they're going to go after are the Christians, and nominal and otherwise. That's the only goal. Their goal was not. If you remember, 15 years ago, the big push was civil unions. Well, they got that. Nobody argued with them. They got then. Well, that wasn't good enough. Now we want marriage. All right, cool. So you got to redefine a word and change the language, which they are excellent. They're professionals at doing that. They're masters at changing the language to fit their narrative. And so that's not enough. Marriage won't be enough. It'll be, I want a Christian minister to marry me, and if you won't, I'm gonna end him. You know, we're gonna push your church out. We're gonna do everything we can to get rid of you. It is all 100% anti-Christian. It has nothing to do with religion in general. It's they hate Christianity. Period. It's an all-out onslaught and battle for these people against Christianity. That's what the whole end game is. Push Christianity off the earth.
And I was thinking about in the days of Gideon, you know, we don't know what that 40-year period was like when a new generation came that shifted from the historical God of Israel, Jehovah, or however you pronounce it, to Baal and Ashtaroth. But I'll bet you they worked in their, ancient ways of saying, no, we don't want the God of the Bible, even if there's only certain books written there. We don't want that God. We want the God that all the countries around us have. We want all this hedonistic pagan fun. It's all about wild, irresponsible sex and having fun. We don't want any restrictions like you get from the God of Israel.
No guilt.
And I'll bet you the same thing happened in Gideon's day.
Yeah, they don't like guilt.
Here's the thing, too, is it says, when I take you into the land that I dispossessed from the people, be careful not to worship me in the ways that they worship their gods. Well, we took this land hundreds of years ago, and God's blessed us. We've done more than any nation ever. We've put people in outer space and cured diseases, and we feed most of this planet. All blessings from God. But then we don't have a border. And so the people that we took the land from are coming back more and more and more. And as they get the right to vote, it's going to turn back into the land that it was before we came. I was seeing something on how true it is. but it was on Facebook. Some writer wrote that they need to remove the white people from the southeast because we're backwards thinking and all of that, and that they need to remove all the whites from the southeast of the country. Why are we spreading these lines between races? And when the federal government makes law and everybody just has to follow it, like with the gay marriage thing, what they've done is do away with states' rights. The state should be able to vote on that, and then if you want to live in a state like that, go to that state.
By the way, I heard this on Fox. There's a new program that's coming up on MTV. It sounds to me it's basically an attack against white people to make white people feel guilty. And I'm thinking, now here's what you would want. I'd want, I mean, if I were trying to build a nation, I'd want the media to try to get people to love American history, love each other, love their own backgrounds, be harmonious, and work together. If I was trying to destroy a nation, I would get people to dislike their parents, their progeny, their background, their history, themselves, and be hating and suspicious of other groups. And I'd pull people apart. It's almost as if academia, and at least some of the media, that's what they're doing. They're attacking people and certain races, and they're making people feel guilty. You know, it's destroying the unity of society.
Well, Hitler
If
had
we ever
gerbils.
all get together and love each other and work together, they're out of business. Satan's out of business. It's over. Can't have that.
You know, Hitler had Joseph Goebbels. That was his propaganda or whatever. Now it's coming from everywhere. It's coming from academia. We don't have one person to look at. This is just coming from everywhere.
And as we think about building our faith, because the only protection we have in the future, I'm not against the idea of having a little extra cash in the house or some extra food and water, you know, short-term stuff for various crises and things that can go wrong. But the only real long-term protection we have is God. Just like the Israelites in Jerusalem, the Christians in Jerusalem, when the Romans surrounded the city, they were told to flee to the mountains. The Romans pulled back. 20,000 Christians got out of there to a place of safety, and they were spared. Romans came back, and horrible things happened. Our only hope is to be with God. If America goes the way Israel did in Gideon's day, and like you said, Dave, turns our back on God, so God removes his blessings. The idea that we are too big to fail, you know that they're cutting another. They're 2 years in a row. They're now announcing another 40,000 cut in troops.
How does that make us stronger?
Now, if God were blessing and protecting us, I'd say we'd be all right irregardless. But if God is not protecting us and we chop our military down, by the way, you know that Germany committed to building a world-class military about 6 months ago. China is building aircraft carriers and building artificial islands that they're arming with airfields and artillery. They're going to take over the Pacific. Japan changed their constitution so they can build an offensive military. You see what's going on in the world, don't you? And at the same time, we're demobilizing. Here's a thought. All these cyber attacks that you see going on with the federal government, well, if I were an enemy of America, here's what I would do. I'd do these cyber attacks. I'd probe the American system, power grid, airlines, military, so I could see what I do. Wouldn't do it all. Going to attack America. I would hit them with a cyber attack maybe 4 or 5 hours before the missile attack, because maybe America would be so messed up by the power grid going down, you know, the computers in the Pentagon going down, airlines can't fly. You know, sure, eventually they'll get all that stuff straightened out, but it'll be too late. Doesn't that seem to you that's what they're doing? They're doing this cyber attacks in preparation for when they need to hit America the hardest.
Well, you saw the stock exchange, and then there was something going on with one of the airlines this week. I think the subway had something happen where they weren't running like they were supposed to. And it seemed to all happen at the same time, you know. And
Well, here's what I can tell you about that. When the Wall Street, and somebody mentioned this, and the more I thought about it, the more sense this makes the most sense. When Wall Street had its hiccup, whatever caused it, everybody went to the Times to check it out. Well, they flooded their servers. They crashed their servers. That's what took the Times down. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, in a world where your government and the people around, the stuff happening around you is swimming so fast, and you can't believe what your own government says. You can't believe what other governments and other agencies tell you. It gets real easy for this stuff to spin out of control. And sometimes I get caught up in it, but if you take a minute to sit back and actually look at what happened, sometimes it explains itself. The Wall Street thing, I don't know what caused it, but that anonymous hacktivist group, claims something that could happen, but maybe they affected something in Wall Street. But the fact that happened is everybody was going to the Times to check it out, crashed their servers. The thing with the airline, they're claiming it was a router. I don't know how a router takes them down, but I don't know. Who knows? But sometimes you just got to sit back, and when everything's happening, stay calm and take a look at the situation. Don't jump to conclusions. I'm guilty of that sometimes, but then once you scale it back and take a look at it, sometimes the explanation is not as crazy or is not as out there as what it first appears to be. But keeping that in mind, a lot of this crazy stuff does happen. What we've said this before. It's not a conspiracy if they really are trying to get you, or not. Paranoia. What was that from? WKRP in Cincinnati. Johnny Fever. It's not paranoia if they really are trying to get you.
Yeah. Well, maybe the two things to think about. We do know that somebody overseas hacked our federal government twice.
Those were major breaches. I listen to a podcast every week that is probably the guy who knows most about this stuff than anybody. He is a big security guy, and he explains this stuff, and it gets real kind of in-depth and geeky, and sometimes they lose me, but it is real interesting when they go through this stuff. Now, he'll do it this week because it happened after his program. So I'll hear more about it next week. But the way he describes this stuff and what's going on is... And when he went over the thing about the government, the hack on the government from a couple of weeks ago, it is bad. What they got was bad. They got everything. All those people that, if you applied for a government job, everything you gave them, they got it. If you were in some secret part of the government, they got it. It is, someone like China would give half their GDP to get this information. I mean, it's just that valuable. They got it all. Everything. They know everybody and everything now that was worked for the government, period.
I had a lady come in the other day, and I don't, probably just a coincidence, but she said that she was talking to her daughter on their cell phones, and her daughter said that she wanted to have a wedding like a real country wedding, like a hee-haw wedding, where they would drink out of mason jars. She said that they laughed. She hung up, and her daughter got a ding on her phone, and when she tapped on it, it said mason jars for sale for weddings.
Huh, that quick.
She said
That's
within
your
minutes.
Google. That's your Google. What she probably did was she probably has a Google phone, and she probably hit the button and searched for it as well, somehow or another. Once you search for anything on Google, it kicks back, and that's how they pay for Google. I mean, they serve you ads. And if you have everything turned on, it custom serves you ads to what you type in or what you search for. You go to Amazon, wherever. You're in Google, you search for it, it's going to start feeding you ads for stuff you want to see. Or for stuff you search for, they assume you want to see it.
That's what I thought, but she told me they're spying on her. So.
No, there's no guy at the end of the phone. Oh, she said mason jars. Quick, guys, send this to her. That's not happening.
Yeah,
but it's just I doubt very much if it picked up on a word, but she probably searched for it before, after. She pulled up pictures of mason
But it is
jars and wedding or something, and it all ties in. That's the way Google works. There's nobody sitting there behind a monitor over in Google Central trying to find out what you're looking for. It's all algorithm and it's all computer.
That's what I tried to tell her, but she's pretty convinced that there's guys with aluminum foil hats and they're catching everything and trying to get you.
One thing I do think, there are offices or batteries of offices with tons of computers, probably a bunch of young men and women sitting there working for certain governments outside of America, trying to hack in to our government servers and maybe our power grid. And let's say if you were a major department store, you had a ton of credit card numbers, really valuable stuff. They're probably trying to hack into some of those too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that China's been banging on our grid for a long time now, trying to get in.
And one thing you can say about encryption coding, theoretically, there is no unbreakable code. Well, maybe you know.
There's code. 256-bit encryption is about as unbreakable. The number is so huge to break it, it's virtually unbreakable. But that's why it exists. That's why the government wants backdoors. You've been seeing this in the news. I don't know how we got off of Gideon and got here. We really went off the rails, guys. But real quick, it's not my fault this time. Anyway, there's encryption so good it can't be broken. All right, so the government wants backdoors into everything, all our devices, all of our equipment. They want backdoors built in so they can access it. It's been in the news. You can search for it. What's the guy's name in England, in Britain? He wants it. Our government wants it. In fact, there was I saw a debate on the news. I saw a debate on one news program how the government wants encryption, and we're selling. And someone else come on and says, no, if you put a back door in, you will break the encryption. So if you put a back door in, it's broke. If you give the government the keys, doesn't matter. It's broke. It's not secure. So that's the argument going on back and forth now. They want a backdoor access to everything we got.
Everything is vulnerable because of the back doors.
Right, which means they don't have it now. That's why they want a law.
Okay.
So enjoy it while you got it.
I was thinking about Gideon, and of course he pulled off a great victory, and his faith was strengthened because God strengthened it. Ways that we can, when we have doubts, realize that God is not offended. If you have doubts and fears, ask God for help. And then there are three things that we thought about, and then we can always add anything else you all want to add. One is deeper understanding of what God is doing. If you look at Romans 10:17, if you want to look at that real quick. Romans 10:17 says, so faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And then he goes on to elaborate and quotes the Psalms. But the point is, if we get into the Bible more, go to church, understand it, really understand it, our faith will get deeper. And then, like we said before, action. Even if you have fears, act on what you know God wants you to act on. And I really believe your actions will force you to get stronger spiritually.
Right.
Well, I'll even use a simple example. If you discover one day you should be going to church on Saturday instead of Sunday, even though you're not so sure about everything, but you start to do what you believe God wants you to do, I believe your faith will get stronger.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I started out with that, and it just built on that. I mean, I started looking up the other things and the pork and everything else, and it just one built upon the other one.
It's amazing to me how many people come into my shop and open up and start telling me things like that. They discovered the Sabbath, and that same woman I talked to a minute ago, she went to her pastor. She says, "You're not teaching what the Bible actually says." She says, "I've been reading this, and this isn't what we're doing." And he said that their traditions trumped the Bible, and So she quit going to church, and she's been keeping the Sabbath. And she said, I just did my first Passover this year, and she's very excited about what she's finding in the Bible. And little bit, she was, what I can tell is we should be a lot more like Jewish people as far as how the Jews do things. I said, yeah, the true Christianity was before Judaism. So, but I've had so many people over the last couple of years tell me these things.
And the opposite may be true. If you refuse to act on what you know to be true, you will lose faith.
Well, what's the scripture? He who seeks to save his own life shall certainly lose it.
Lose it, yeah.
I mean,
and I think that goes back to what we were talking about last week about getting to church. If you can possibly get to church, if you live too far, if you can make it once a month, that's if it's financially or because of whatever health reasons, maybe you can make it once a month or every other week, or try just what you can, do what you can to get there.
And try to come.
Best thing to do is I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, try to come to the feast too.
If
it's a money thing, talk to your local church or whoever, or me or somebody. Maybe you can get some help. Plus, once you get to the feast, we have excess festival funds that we usually give people to help them with meals and activities and stuff like that. And in Branson, we're going to have at least, I believe, 3 free meals if all goes as planned.
So there is a free lunch.
There you go. A couple of weeks ago, when that ruling came down, I mean, Dan and Kay, they live quite a ways away. They can't make it very often, but after that hit, they just felt that they should be at services with the brethren, and they came last couple of weeks, and that was great to see them. It was beautiful, and I understand what he means when he says that. It's just when things get tough, you tend to pull together with the people that feel that you can trust, that you feel comfortable with, to be around, and then that understand. I mean, it almost without speaking, understand where we're at as a people, and understand where our country or this country is at right now. And it's very helpful to be with this people of like mind.
When I was a teenager, we went every other week because church was so far, and we actually had to go to another country to go to church. So we were living in Caribou, Maine, and we had to cross the border. Closest church was in Canada, so we had to go through customs twice on the Sabbath, and we went every other Sabbath into Canada for church. But my mother kept it consistent.
I go across the border, I ain't getting back in.
The Canadians forced us back.
You're taking them, people. Go.
Carrying that dangerous Bible back and forth.
Yeah, well, that was a long time ago.
That's what
someday that'll be the case. It'll be like Saudi Arabia.
Well, there's
Yvonne said that they didn't like her carrying the Bible in and out of Canada. Was that year before last? She was telling us that, Canadian Border Guards.
You're kidding.
No, I heard that from another person that's up there as well.
You know what? They've got some crazy laws up there recently. One of them is if you tell the truth about someone and it hurts them somehow, even if it's true, you can get put in jail. You can get found liable, or you can be found guilty of slander. Even if it's true. If you tell like a politician did something, and someone spills the beans on a politician, well, they're not going after the politician. They'll go after you for saying it. Well, it's true. I can prove it. Too bad. We don't like it. You hurt them somehow. You caused them damage. Wow. Caused damage to them. It's crazy up there.
I know we're about out of time, but I want to give a shout out to Bill and Carolyn, but also mention what's coming up next week. We will do the 5th commandment next weekend, next Friday, and anyway, that should be interesting.
All right, and I also want to say, Don Porman. Don Porman he went to ambulance just a few hours ago. If you guys know Don, he lost his wife a few years ago. She was just a wonderful person, and now he's got some kind of an emergency. We haven't heard any updates, so if you would keep Don in your prayers, I'd really appreciate it. He's been a really good friend, and he's just a great guy. Just wanted to mention that. And next week, like you said, the fifth commandment. And speaking of Dan, a few minutes ago, we're trying to get his intro on here and sign off for this evening.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
See everybody next week.